Okay, in lecture 2 that you just completed, we discussed the female reproductive system and how every single 28 days or month cycle, the female body prepares itself for pregnancy, and we discussed what happens if fertilization or pregnancy doesn't happen. So now, of course, we need to move on to what happens when fertilization does happen. First thing, fertilization is just the term for a sperm and egg coming together. Fertilization is not pregnancy. It does not begin with fertilization. Far more times than you hear about, it's a lot more common than you think that a fertilized egg, a zygote, will not implant itself in the woman's uterus. It will just be discarded. It's called a spontaneous abortion. So pregnancy does not begin at fertilization. So just get that out of the way. So fertilization occurs when a sperm and egg come together and form a zygote. This is the term for a fertilized egg that now has 23 chromosomes from the sperm cell and 23 chromosomes from the egg cell. We talked about the acrosome in front of the sperm's head. That is an enzyme that helps it, deteriorate the outer protective lining of the egg cell. All the sperm that make it to the egg, and like we talked about, there could be 50 to 100 sperm that make it there. They're all trying to get in, so all of their acrosomes, all of those enzymes are working together to break down that outer barrier and then allowing one sperm to enter the egg. Okay, just the head and mid-piece, the neck enter. The flagellum never actually goes into the egg. That actually breaks off and is left outside. But as soon as one sperm enters the egg, a chemical reaction takes place that blocks any other sperm from entering. Why? Well, because if you have more than one sperm, you're going to have too many chromosomes, and that child will not be, like that zygote will never actually grow up to become a fetus. Now that when the sperm's nucleus, so those 23 chromosomes in the sperm, fuse with the egg's nucleus, the 23 chromosomes in the egg, and they make the new zygote diploid with the proper 46 chromosomes or 23 pairs. Just visualization. So all of these, so you can see these right here, these are actually, they're follicle cells that are attached to the outside of the egg, okay? The sperm will get through that, and then this right here is that protective barrier that I've been talking about, okay? So the nose of the sperm, the acrosome, those enzymes are going to be helpful in breaking through these follicle cells and also breaking through this nutritive barrier. See here, it's like it's breaking down, breaking them through. And this is just showing one sperm throughout time, but many sperm are actually helping break down this outer barrier in order to allow one sperm to get in, okay? Once the head reaches inside the egg here, the tail is left behind. That actually breaks off and is released. The nucleus of the sperm cell combines with the nucleus of the egg cell, and you get 2N diploid zygote. Now from there, almost immediately after fertilization, something called cleavage starts. So cleavage is what we call cell division. It's what we call rapid cell division. So remember back when we talked about mitosis, in animal cells, the cell, when it's ready for cytokinesis, will split, will form cleavage furrows. So pinching in at the top and bottom and then split. Well, cleavage is referring to a rapid growth, but without growing in size. So the cells are staying the same size. So the cell itself, the zygote, is staying the same size. But the inside of that zygote is dividing and dividing and dividing and dividing, so that what you get is you get a ball of cells. So this didn't copy very well in the transfer from PowerPoint to this app, but you start with a zygote, and then the zygote starts rapidly dividing without growing in size. That's called cleavage. That leads to the morula, which is a solid ball of cells. That's the morula. And then the morula will hollow itself out to form a blastocyst, which is this hollowed out ball of cells, and then the blastocyst will go through a process called gastrulation to become the gastrula, which I'm going to talk about in the next page. Okay, so by the time cleavage is over and the morula becomes the blastocyst, it's the blastocyst, that actually implants itself into the wall of the uterus. And that is when pregnancy begins. So pregnancy begins with implantation, not fertilization. So this is already several days after fertilization has happened, because it's gone through cleavage, it's become a morula, it's hollowed out into a blastocyst, and then at that point, the blastocyst is what is going to implant itself into the uterus. Visualization here, again, I don't know what this I don't know what that is. Problem with the again, problem with the transfer over. But the picture to the right here, you have the zygote. That's your fertilized egg. That will split into 2 cells, and then the 2 cells will split into 4, and then the 4 will split into 8. Notice how the outside, the actual size of the zygote, it didn't change from here to here. The outside is still the same size. Outside is still the same size. Outside is still the same size. That is important because all of this is happening from the zygote all the way down to the blastocyst. That's happening in the oviduct or fallopian tube, which is very, very small. Now, what do you think would happen if these balls of cells were not only dividing but growing? Well, it's the same thing that happens sometimes if there's something called an ectopic pregnancy. An ectopic pregnancy or an extrauterine pregnancy is when the zygote, the cleavage, that ball of cells actually implants itself into the wall of the fallopian tube instead of the ovary. That becomes a problem when the blastocyst becomes the gastrula, and then the gastrula starts growing. It can actually cause the fallopian tube to rupture. So that is why it's important that while the zygote is going through cleavage, while that's actually happening, it's not getting any bigger in the outside. It doesn't actually start growing until after it is implanted into the uterus. And this right here is what implants itself. So over the course of several days, the cell is dividing. It makes this solid ball of many cells all together, and then it hollows out, so you have an inner cellular mass and space. And then that is going to go through a process called gastrulation to make a gastrula, which is 3 separate layers of cells and tissues. So we say human pregnancy, typically people say, 9 months. It's actually more specific, it's actually closer to 10 months when you actually add it all up. It's 40 weeks. Approximately 40 weeks is the actual gestation period for humans. Now, gestation period for different species is all different. What goes into play? Well, size of the organism, whatever that is. Of course, larger organisms are going to take more time to grow. Elephants, for example, their gestation period is about 2 years. But an elephant is born and it's already very, very large, has the ability to walk, everything like that. So humans, 40 weeks, it's divided into 3 trimesters based on certain events that are happening in each one of those trimesters. The first trimester, you start with the blastocyst. So this, remember, that is what implants into the uterus, in the uterine wall. And then it goes through a process called gastrulation. So what gastrulation is the bottom part kind of folds inward to make this like kind of horseshoe shape. And then what happens is the cells, the inner mass of cells, start separating themselves out into 3 separate layers. Okay, so the separate layers, you have the ectoderm, which is the outside of the cell, the outside of the gastrula. That is actually what becomes the outer part of your body. So skin. You have the mesoderm. Meso, we've talked about before. Meso means middle. So that is like the middle portion. So your muscles, your bones, outer linings of organs. And then you have your endoderm all the way on the inside. That would be things like your digestive tract, intestines, stomach, all the way in the middle. Okay, so those 3 layers in the gastrula are eventually going to differentiate and become different parts of your body. Now that word right there, differentiate, what that means is that so far all of these cells are exactly the same. They're what we call stem cells. Stem cells are very important because they have the ability to become any other type of cell in your body. So differentiation means, I mean, we all know by now that your cells all look different based on what their job is, okay? Red blood cells look like kind of flattened discs. Nerve cells have like a long, they're neurons, which have two ends that look almost like a rod. Cheek cells are very, very tiny. So all of these things, they look different, and they look different based on their structure, which is based on their function. What is it that they're doing? That happens, that differentiation happens during this process, gastrulation, and then from the gastrula, they can actually become what they're supposed to be. So you have this one type of cell, stem cells, that are all going to start, all right, we're going to be heart cells, we're going to be liver cells, we're going to be blood cells, we're going to be brain cells, and all of them are going to change shape and become what it is they're meant to do. Also, in the first trimester, obviously, the placenta has to form. So this is how during the first few weeks, the yolk sac is actually feeding the embryo, and then that allows time for the placenta to form. Chorionic villi, what this means is that there are blood vessels coming from the embryo, and then uterine lining, where it has blood vessels from the mother. Those two things together make the placenta. They are not attached to each other. The baby's blood vessels and the mother's blood vessels never actually interact, okay? What they do is they're very, very small. You have capillaries. What happens is that material needed for the embryo diffuses out of the mother's blood and into the fetal blood. Same thing for if it needs to get rid of something. Wastes are diffused out of the fetal blood and into the mother's blood to be gotten rid of. They never ever directly mix. That's important because sometimes mothers and embryos or mothers and fetus do not have compatible blood types. So what that means is that the blood itself never mixes, causing that immune reaction. But you're still able to take in nutrients from the mother and get rid of waste. This right here, HCG. Remember how I said it's really, really important that I said pregnancy does not begin at fertilization, it begins in implantation. Pregnancy begins in implantation, and how does the body know it's pregnant? Immediately, that implanted blastocyst is going to start producing this HCG hormone. It's called the pregnancy hormone. The long name for it is human chorionic gonadotropin. I'm not going to make you memorize that, but what that does, so this HCG here, so we got to go back for just a second to the female reproductive system and how the hormone levels maintain that ovarian cycle. So remember, towards the end of the cycle, when you're getting towards menstruation, the corpus luteum is producing progesterone. Those levels stay up. It causes the endometrium, that uterine lining, to thicken and be full of blood. If progesterone levels fall, that uterine lining is shed, and then the cycle starts all over again. If this hormone begins being released, the pregnancy hormone, it keeps progesterone levels high. Why is that important? High progesterone levels means the uterine lining is not going to be shed, which is good because if the uterine lining shed, when there's a blastocyst in there, guess what? The embryo is going with it. And it also inhibits or stops the production of FSH. So these two hormones together, the HCG and the progesterone, stop the pituitary gland from making FSH and producing that and having those levels go up, which means the ovarian cycle is going to stop until those progesterone levels fall. When do they fall? After birth. This is the most important trimester in terms, excuse me, in terms of growth. And by growth, I don't just mean getting bigger. What I mean is this is the time when the vast majority of the internal organs are being formed. So the brain and spinal cord are formed by the 3rd week. Heart is beating typically by the 4th week. You got the digestive system, like everything is being formed right, like obviously not completely formed, but the beginning of formation. And these things are going to start working at different times during pregnancy, but the majority of them are forming right now in this early part of pregnancy between like the 3rd week and the 7th week of pregnancy. Sometimes this happens even before the woman knows that she's pregnant. It's happened. It happens more often than you would think. So this is why if a woman is planning pregnancy, if she thinks that she might be pregnant, she can take prenatal vitamins that are high in folic acid that actually help stimulate healthy development. And this is the main time during pregnancy when it's super, super dangerous to smoke, drink, caffeine, certain antibiotics, Pepto-Bismol, Tylenol, all of those things can be extremely detrimental, especially during this time, because like I said, this is the time when all of those internal organs are beginning to be formed. So this is the time. So again, it's kind of like, and it's kind of between a rock and a hard place. Like I said, some women don't even know they're pregnant at this point. So they could be continuing to go on with their, normal daily lives, drinking their coffee, have a glass of wine, and have no idea that they might be doing damage to an embryo that they already have. 2nd trimester, you can hear the heartbeat. You can see the skeleton and hair forming. This is when it's just kind of this is where women get to see, like, they'll start feeling the baby move. They'll start feeling it hiccup or kick. They might be able to find out if it's male or female. You can normally do that around week 20. And the fetus will also go through regular sleep cycles. Now, the main thing about this 2nd trimester is all of these movements, hiccuping, kicking, sucking its thumb, all of these things are reflexes at this point, okay? There is no brain activity at this point. So all of these things, they're happening without any purposefulness. So it's like when you go to the doctor and the doctor takes that like triangle, like plastic or rubber thing and then smacks you in the knee with it, and then your leg flips up. That's a reflex. It's not you doing the movement, it's your neurons. So at this point, that's what's happening. The baby itself, it's now a fetus. It's no longer an embryo, it's a fetus. But all of these movements are just pure reflex. And then the 3rd trimester, this is where it start to be able to detect brain activity. It's a main period of growth. So when we're talking about growth here, it's not the development of organs, but this growth is rapidly increasing in size. This is the time when the fetus can actually start. You can hear sounds. So they say, sometimes play music to a fetus, can detect light through the abdominal wall. And this is where the circulatory and respiratory systems get ready for breathing air, because up until now, the fetus has been breathing liquid. It's been breathing amniotic fluid. So the last things, really the last organs to prepare for birth are the heart and lungs, more specifically the lungs, which is why I'm sure that you guys have heard if a baby is born prematurely, and premature typically means like 35 weeks or before, a lot of times they might have to stay in the hospital because they get like a lung infection or something like that. That's because their lungs were not totally ready to be born. Now, the 3rd trimester, typically gestation is done at about 37 weeks. 36, 37 weeks, the lungs are ready to go. Why 40 weeks then? Well, this is the time when the fetus is going to put on about 1/2 pound a week just in fat. So again, that's tremendous growth. So making sure that fetus, that baby, is ready to come out when it comes out. But typically 36 to 37 weeks, that all of the internal organs have been formed, and there's really no danger in being born at that point. So now it's time for the birth. Again, everything is controlled by hormones. So again, you get hormones, the hormones that are going to cause the uterine lining to begin to contract. We talked about some of those when we talked about the male reproductive system. Well, now the hormones are beginning to are going to cause the uterine wall to begin to contract. It's just a muscle in order to, and the uterus actually has to be the thing to push the baby out. The amniotic sac ruptures. That is what you've probably heard, I'm sure, many times before when a woman refers to my water just broke or water break, something like that. It's not water, it's amniotic fluid. It's not urine, it's amniotic fluid. Once that sac ruptures, once the water breaks, you gotta go. There's like, sometimes if a woman is like super early in her, if super early compared to her due date, and she starts having contractions, doctors may be able to stop those contractions and, allow her to not give birth for a while. Once the amniotic sac ruptures, that's it. No going back, because if you don't get that baby out, it's gonna suffocate. Cervix must dilate it to 10 centimeters in width before pushing. I want you guys to think, okay, 10 centimeters. It's not 10 inches. So sometimes I think you guys, like, in your head, you're like, oh yeah, that's a pretty big opening, right? Well, this is not 10 inches. It's not almost a foot. It is 10 centimeters. 10 centimeters is about... It's actually a little bit less than than these words. So I'm gonna say it's here. Nope, go away. 10 centimeters is, it's about this long. Hey. Sorry about that, technical difficulties. So 10 centimeters is actually about that long. Okay, compare that length to the size of a baby's head if you've ever seen a newborn baby. Okay, it's not a large opening. It's actually quite small, which is why childbirth is painful. Also, the fetus, the baby has to be head down. Why? Well, because the baby actually has to get pushed through the mother's pelvic bone. And what can happen if the fetus is feet first? Well, it could get stuck in the pelvic bone. So now the cervix, that bottom part, that kind of the closed off part of the uterus down at the bottom, that is dilated to 10 centimeters. The baby is pushed out through the birth canal or vagina, again, by the contractions of the uterus. That's called labor. And then once the baby's born, immediately the umbilical cord is cut, and now the baby has to breathe on his or her own. Now, unfortunately, at that point, mom is not done. Mom still has to do the afterbirth. The afterbirth is the placenta and parts of the uterine lining that need to be expelled or pushed out after the fetus is there, because the umbilical cord, remember, is still attached to the inside of the mother's uterus. It doesn't just it doesn't just disappear. So that actually has to be expelled as well. So these are the steps of birth. Here's the upside down fetus. Here's the cervix. This is the part that's dilating right here. Upside down again, the fetus has to be pushed out through the pelvic bone, so it can't be feet first or it might get stuck. So that's the dilation. Expulsion, delivery of the infant, the baby. Now you've got your baby. And then this part here, see the placenta detaching from the inside of the uterine wall, and that will be expelled out as well. This happens sometimes if there's some kind of complication with the pregnancy, or for some reason the baby is in distress, or the mother sometimes the baby is just too big and the mother can't get it out. In that case, you do something called a cesarean section or C-section. That is when the actual, and it is a major surgery, because they're cutting the skin, and then they actually have to cut into the uterine wall. So they're slicing open that muscle and removing the baby. No, they do not remove the baby like it is in this picture by the head. They're not just going to pull the baby out by the head. Okay, they're not. But they're going to make the incision as small as possible to make it easier for the mother to recover, remove the baby. then they actually just go ahead and remove the placenta and the umbilical cord, and then they stitch the mother back up. Now, sometimes, depending on, like, I know back when I was born by C-section, and then when my brother was born a couple years later, they told my mom, no, you can't have a regular birth because you could, like, the scar tissue left over from your previous surgery could tear in the middle of birth. So she had to get a C-section with my brother as well. Now that, I believe they've gotten better with that, so it's not necessarily definite, but if you've had one C-section, odds are you're probably gonna, not you guys, obviously, but if a woman has one C-section, odds are that if she has any more children, she'll have more C-sections, because it's just safer than worrying about that muscle could actually tear. So that is our human reproduction unit. I know, very, very quick. You are going to have a short quiz on this lecture that is posted in Schoology, and that just to prove that you listened to it and took the notes. And then your next class on Tuesday, you will have a 50-point quiz on these 3 lectures before we move on to evolution.